In the middle of the glittering grand ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton, an elderly father found himself shoved into the darkest, grimiest corner by his own daughter-in-law. She sat him right next to the men's restroom, claiming it was necessary to avoid ruining the high-class vibe of her $500,000 wedding. The constant, groaning sound of toilets flushing muffled her cruel sneers as she told her friends, "This spot is perfect for a man who smells like engine oil and old sweat." But just as the bride, a self-absorbed social media influencer, was basking in the spotlight and bragging about her newfound wealth, the father slowly stood up. He walked toward the main stage with a steady, quiet dignity. Under the harsh glow of the spotlights, he pulled out a wedding gift check worth $5 million. Right there in front of 200 elite guests, he tore it into tiny pieces. A deathly silence fell over the room as the confetti of shredded paper drifted to the floor like a final judgment on their greed. Was this public humiliation the end of the story, or was it merely the opening act of a cold, calculated revenge? Stay with us to find out. My name is Thomas, and just last week, I turned 70 years old. As I sit here now, surrounded by the quiet haze of the suburbs, I still find it hard to believe that a dark, cramped corner next to a restroom at the Ritz-Carlton was where I finally found my freedom. They often say that when a man reaches the winter of his life, all he truly needs is a seat of honor at his child's celebration. But for me, honor wasn't found at that gold-plated banquet table. No, my honor was shattered, piece by piece, by the groaning sound of toilets flushing right next to my ear. To understand how a father as forgiving as I once was could coldly shred $5 million in front of his own son, I have to take you back to the very beginning. It is a long story of grease-stained hands, of blind sacrifices, and of a cold-blooded betrayal that I, in my own love, unknowingly nurtured right under my own roof. I was sitting there, tucked away right by the entrance to the men's room of the most luxurious hotel in Boston. The rickety wooden table they gave me looked like it had been dragged out of a dusty basement. It was wobbly, pathetic, and utterly out of place in that gilded ballroom. Every few minutes, the toilets would flush with a loud, hollow moan. The pungent smell of bleach and cleaning chemicals hit me square in the face, mixing in a sickening way with the scent of prime rib and expensive truffles wafting in from the main hall. I drove my old pickup truck away from the Ritz-Carlton, heading back to my quiet red brick house in the Boston suburbs. When I stepped inside, I didn't turn on the lights. I prefer the darkness. It helps me look into the past more clearly than this bitter present ever could. I sat down in the worn-out leather chair in my library, my hand slowly pouring a splash of scotch. It was sharp with a heavy, smoky finish, the kind of flavor that reminded me of my early days in a dingy machine shop, where the smell of grease and rusted iron was the only cologne I knew. In the shadows, my fingers traced a hand-drawn blueprint of the first factory I built 40 years ago. I spent my life turning lifeless blocks of steel into precision aircraft components. From nothing but my bare hands, I quietly built a fortune worth tens of millions of dollars, never once feeling the need to show it off. But that success came at the price of loneliness. My wife passed away when our son was only 10 years old. On the day of her funeral, I stood over her grave and swore I would never let our boy want for anything. I spoiled him blindly, trying to use money to fill the void his mother left behind. I thought I was planting the seeds of happiness, but as it turned out, I was only fertilizing a seed of greed. I remember an afternoon 6 months ago when he walked in here to demand money for Brittany's engagement ring. He looked at my old machine models and dusty technical books with pure disdain. "Dad," he said, "I honestly don't understand why you're sitting on such a massive pile of cash. Look at yourself. You just rot away in this old house with your pile of rusty scrap metal. It's not like you're actually spending the money." When I tried to mention the value of hard work, he cut me off instantly. "Just loan me $200,000. I can't have Brittany looking like a pauper in front of her friends. I don't want to be looked down on just because you're hoarding all that money until the day you go into the ground. $200,000 for a ring. That amount represented 5 years of backbreaking labor during my younger days, but to him, it was just the price of hollow vanity. My heart ached, but my blind devotion won out. I signed the check and even managed to smile. "Here, take it. I promise there will be a much bigger gift on your wedding day." He grabbed the check. His eyes lit up with satisfaction, but there wasn't a single word of thanks. Sitting in this library tonight, I realized with a bitter sting that generosity wasn't love. It was an act of enabling. I believed that if I gave enough, I would eventually earn his respect. How ridiculous! Respect is the one thing money can never buy. I swallowed a mouthful of the bitter scotch. That shredded $5 million check in my vest pocket is the end of a 40-year-old illusion. I'm ready to show him that if I could build an empire from nothing, I have more than enough power to level everything he's clinging to. And then there was Brittany. She was the one who truly pushed my son's greed over the edge. She entered my home as a guest, but she intended to become the master of this estate in the cruelest way possible. Brittany's arrival in this house was like a storm disguised as renovation. She's a social media influencer, a parasite wrapped in a glittering shell. She didn't enter my family to become a member. She came to establish a new kingdom, one where my values were treated like trash. In just 1 month, she changed everything. The warm oak tables and chairs, the very places where my wife and I used to sit together, were replaced by cold metal and marble. She claimed oak was so last century and that it ruined the backdrop for her promotional photos. But what burned me the most was when she touched my wife's belongings. One afternoon, I stood frozen as I watched Brittany pick up an old film camera, my wife's treasure, and toss it straight into the trash. She muttered, "What a piece of junk. How can people keep this dusty garbage in $1 million home?" I didn't stop her. I just stood there, my heart tightening at this brutal invasion of the home I had built from the ground up. That night, I quietly retrieved the camera, wiped away the dirt, and locked it in my safe. That was the moment I realized my home had been occupied by cruelty. Brittany's hypocrisy disgusted me. To my face, she called me Dad with a voice like honey, but behind my back, through my hearing aid, I heard her razor-sharp words. One evening, her snapping at my son echoed loud and clear. "You have to choose, Lucas. Either live up to my high society standards or cling to your father's rusty scrap metal of a factory. I can't let my followers see me living with an old man in a hideous flannel shirt who reeks of engine oil. It's damaging my personal brand." And my son, the child I once hoped would protect the family legacy, remained silent. He had been blinded by the hollow glamour Brittany painted for him. My presence was now nothing more than an obstacle to their social climbing. They wanted my fortune, but they loathed the very hands that created it. The resentment inside me turned into a terrifying chill. I began to wonder, if I were no longer their mobile ATM, would they even maintain this last bit of politeness? Ladies and gentlemen, if your blood boils hearing such ungrateful words directed at a father who sacrificed his whole life, please hit like and leave a respect comment to support me. Now, let's see just how far their malice truly went. They had already begun plotting to eliminate me entirely right before the wedding took place. Betrayal never comes from your enemies. It always comes from the ones you were willing to die to protect. After Brittany's insults, I decided I was done being a frail, messy old man. I spent $15,000 on a state-of-the-art Oticon hearing aid. It was so small it practically disappeared inside my ear canal, but its power was terrifying. It could record and transmit every conversation within a 60-foot radius directly to my iPhone 15 Pro. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to put them to the test. I faked a spell of exhaustion and lay in my bedroom with the door ajar, acting like a senile old man drifting into a deep sleep brought on by joint pain. But in my ear, every sound from the living room was crystal clear. I heard the rustle of papers, Brittany's giggling in a strange, gravelly, professional voice. It was her private attorney. "The plan is simple," the lawyer said. "Right after the honeymoon in the Hamptons, we'll file the paperwork with the court, with the medical records regarding his forgetfulness that I prepared. The court will declare him legally incompetent. At that point, Lucas, you will be the sole legal guardian. All shares in Redford Holdings will fall under your control." I lay there motionless, my hands gripping the bed sheets. My heart tightened. It felt like 1,000 needles were stabbing my back. The child I once held in my arms, the boy I stayed up all night caring for when he was sick, was now sitting there in silence, agreeing to a plan to cast his father into the darkness. And what about the $5 million wedding check? Lucas's voice shook, but not from guilt. It was pure greed. Brittany gave a cold laugh. We take that first. Then, you just sign right here, and we'll move him to a remote assisted living facility in rural Maine. No self-service, no internet. He won't be able to use that senile mouth of his to bother our high society life anymore. He can rot there with his pile of rusty mechanical memories. I sat up in the darkness of the bedroom as their footsteps faded away. The moonlight drifted through the window, illuminating my scarred hands. I took a scrap of paper, grabbed a wooden pencil, and began mapping out my own financial empire. Every subsidiary, every piece of real estate on Fifth Avenue, every trust fund. Finally, I pressed the lead down and drew a massive, dark X over Lucas's name. This realization was as cold as ice. I didn't feel the pain anymore. My last tear for my son had dried up long ago. When kindness is treated as a weakness, then power must speak to restore order. I picked up my phone, my fingers sliding across the touchscreen to call Mark, my loyal assistant of 30 years. My voice was hard, without a single tremor. Mark, I have a small change to the wedding at the plaza tomorrow night. Don't bring the original check. Prepare a party that those two kids will never forget. I want them to know exactly what betrayal costs. I hung up. Silence filled the room. Tonight, the forgiving father died. Only the chairman of Redford Holdings remained, ready to hand down a just sentence. On the morning of the wedding at the plaza, I received a brief text from Brittany. No, how are you? And not a shred of warmth. It read, your seat is at table 42. Don't wander around, and don't try to strike up conversations with anyone. We want to avoid any misunderstandings about the family's social standing. To stay put, when the party's over, give the check to Lucas. And make sure you keep the check crisp, no wrinkles. I stood before the mirror, wearing an old suit I bought 10 years ago. I chose this outfit on purpose, hiding my rare Patek Philippe watch under the frayed sleeves. Standing in the hotel lobby, I took a deep breath of the smell of cheap grease wafting from the kitchen. That was the scent of the final betrayal my son had served me. As I entered the ballroom, the grandeur was breathtaking, golden lights and the heavy fragrance of imported roses. But my table, table 42, was completely isolated. It was tucked away in a dark corner, right next to the restrooms and the kitchen service entrance. Every time a server pushed a cart by, the heat and the clatter of dishes slammed into my back. High society guests passing by threw me looks of pure disdain, as if I were a beggar who had wandered into a palace by mistake. My son, Lucas, approached me in a sleek tuxedo. Instead of looking at his father with an ounce of regret, he scowled with irritation when he saw me about to head toward the main hall to complain. He hissed through his teeth, his voice dripping with impatience. Dad, please. Look at yourself. This seat is exactly where you belong today. This is Brittany's big day. She worked incredibly hard to get New York's elite here. Don't go ruining everything with that hollow pride of yours. Just sit down, keep quiet, and behave. Don't make her ashamed of having you as a father. Those words were the final knife that severed our bond. Hollow pride? I had used that very pride to build every cent of fortune they so desperately craved. I nodded without a word and quietly sat down on the cheap plastic chair at table 42. Brittany stood in the distance, busy taking photos with other influencers, never once deigning to look my way. I sat there, right by the men's room entrance, listening to the toilets flush and the smell of cleaning chemicals begin to spread. I slowly pulled the $5 million check from my inner pocket. I traced my finger over those 6 zeros, a bitter smile spreading across my lips. This piece of paper was all they wanted. They thought once they had it, they could toss me into some rundown nursing home and enjoy their luxury in peace. They thought I was just a senile old man, easy to deceive and eager to obey. I checked my watch. The ceremony was about to begin. Mark, my assistant, texted me. Everything is ready, Mr. Chairman. The live stream starts in 5 minutes. I tucked the check away and stood up from that filthy table. I was no longer the discarded father. I was the one holding the verdict. The plan was complete. The humiliation they forced on me tonight will be the most expensive price they would ever pay. Vibrant purple and gold lights flooded the main stage of the plaza. Brittany stepped up, her mermaid-style wedding gown shimmering as if it were encrusted with diamonds. She held a gold microphone, beaming at the 200 guests from New York's high society. Her voice rang out through the expensive speakers, melodic but dripping with arrogance. She began by bragging about Lucas's success in their luxury travels, before shifting her tone to a fake, patronizing kindness. On this momentous day, we haven't forgotten the contributions of our family. Even though Lucas's father, Tom, is a senile old man with failing health and a mind that isn't quite what it used to be, we promise to take excellent care of him in his final days at a very special assisted living facility. I sat at table 42, hearing every sugar-coated insult. I looked at the glass of water on my table. The surface still had a slight film of residue from the kitchen's old plumbing. I picked up the glass, drained it in one gulp as if swallowing the last of my bitterness, and slammed it down on the wooden table. A sharp, dry thud echoed during a lull in the music. That was my declaration of war. I stood up, adjusted my frayed vest, and slipped out of the dark corner by the restroom. I marched straight toward the main stage. The 200 guests began to whisper, their eyes filled with surprise and judgment as they watched me approach. Brittany turned pale when she saw me coming. Her mask of civility vanished in an instant, replaced by pure malice. Forgetting she was still holding the microphone, she shrieked into the air. "What do you think you're doing? Get back to your filthy toilet. Security, get this old man out of here before he ruins my ceremony." Lucas stood beside her, trembling, torn between intervening and obeying his wife. I didn't stop. I stepped onto the platform, standing face to face with Brittany. The brilliant white spotlight hit me directly, exposing every wrinkle in the fiery eyes of a father who had finally woken up. I pulled the $5 million check from my pocket. I didn't say a word. I just held it high under the stage lights. The words $5 million, written in bold, clear letters, slammed into Brittany and Lucas's vision. The entire room held its breath. Brittany's hand twitched, reaching for the check, her eyes gleaming with bottomless greed. But just as her fingers brushed the paper, I moved the check right against the live microphone. Rip! The sound of tearing paper shrieked through the high-powered speakers. Rip! Rip! I tore that $5 million check into 4, then 8 small pieces. The scraps drifted down like black snowflakes in the middle of the ballroom. A deathly silence gripped the room. No one moved. No one breathed. Brittany stood frozen, her face distorted with shock and regret. I looked deep into my son's eyes. He was standing there like a statue. My voice boomed to the microphone, steady and commanding. This check was meant for my son. But tonight, I realize I no longer have a son. I only see 2 strangers trying to build a castle on the pain of an old man. I let go of the microphone. It hit the stage floor with a dull, metallic thud, marking the end of all family ties. I turned my back and walked away, leaving behind Brittany's frantic screams and Lucas's shattered face. But they didn't know that the $5 million check was only the beginning. The real sentence for their ingratitude and cruelty was still sitting in my lawyer's office, waiting to grind their high society dreams into dust. To get that $5 million check at the wedding, I had to pay a price that no father on this earth should ever have to endure. One day before the ceremony at the plaza, I performed one final test to see if a human heart still beat inside my son's chest. I faked a minor stroke right there in the living room. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, my eyes glazed over as I looked toward Lucas and Brittany. Deep down, I prayed they would scream, call 911, grab my hand, and cry. But they didn't. The silence that filled the room was more terrifying than death itself. "Look, Lucas," Brittany's voice rang out, without a trace of panic. "The opportunity is here. Get him into the bedroom now. Call Attorney Miller. Tell him to bring that contract over immediately." They dragged me brutally into the bedroom and tossed me onto bed like a heavy sandbag. I lay motionless, my eyes squeezed shut, but every one of my senses was wound tight like a violin string. Under the pillow, a tiny voice recorder was silently working, capturing every sound of their crime. 15 minutes later, their lawyer arrived. I could smell the heavy scent of cigarettes on his breath as he leaned down to check my eyes. "He's comatose," he said coldly. "Make it fast." Brittany grabbed my right hand. She wasn't gentle. Her perfectly manicured fingers squeezed mine, brutally dipping my thumb into a jar of thick, red ink. The slimy, cold sensation of the ink sticking to my skin made my soul shiver. To me, it wasn't ink. It was the blood leaking from my own heart. She pressed my thumb firmly onto the will, and the stock transfer papers for Redford Holdings. 1 page, 2 pages, then 3. Every time she pressed down, I heard her muffled chuckle right next to my ear. "Sign it quickly, old man," she whispered, her voice dripping with disgust. "You should thank us for putting you in a luxury nursing home instead of letting you rot alone in that greasy old factory of yours. Look at you. Even breathing is costing us money. Don't worry. After tomorrow, you won't have to care about this world anymore." Lucas stood there. I didn't hear him protest. I only heard him sigh, a sigh of pure relief, as if the burden of being a son was finally being lifted. "Keep it clean," my son told the lawyer. "I don't want any trouble when I take over the company next week." My heart went cold. It was a chill deeper than the death they were wishing upon me. I had spent 40 years building an empire, and it took only 40 seconds to realize I had raised a pair of wolves. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were eating me alive while I was still breathing. When they left the room and slammed the door to start popping champagne in the living room, I opened my eyes. I looked at my crimson-stained thumb in the darkness. That red ink was the ironclad evidence, the death warrant for our relationship. I sat up and pulled the recorder from under the pillow. My tears had finally run dry. I picked up the phone and called my personal attorney and Mark. My voice was no longer that of a dying father. It was the voice of a hunter preparing to cast his final net. "Mark," I said, my voice deep and steel-hard, "the blood contract has been signed. Tomorrow at the wedding, we're going to show the world who these monsters really are." I hung up, walked into the bathroom, and slowly washed the red ink from my thumb. But the wound in my heart would never heal. As the sound of the tearing paper faded, the entire ballroom at the plaza fell into a bone-chilling silence. Brittany froze for a split second, then suddenly snapped. Losing every ounce of her high society bride persona, she lunged onto the floor, crawling at my feet to scramble for the shredded pieces of that $5 million check. Lucas panicked, rushing over to grab my arm, shaking me like a madman. "Dad, are you crazy? That was our money. You can't destroy it just because of a seating arrangement." I stood as still as a rock in a rushing river. Slowly, I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out the white silk handkerchief embroidered with my late wife's name. I took my time wiping away the red ink still clinging to my thumbnail, the filthy stain from that forced contract yesterday. When I was finished, I tossed the dirty cloth directly into Brittany's face as she looked up at me with eyes full of pure hatred. "Your future?" I said. I pulled out my iPhone 15 Pro and pressed a single button. Immediately, the massive projector screen behind the stage, the one meant to display romantic photos of the happy couple, flashed to life. But there were no wedding photos. Instead, the audio from the recorder under my pillow last night blared through the speakers, slamming into the eardrums of the 200 guests. "Sign it quickly, old man. You should thank us for putting you in a nursing home instead of letting you rot in that greasy old factory." Brittany's voice rang out, crystal clear and dripping with malice. Then came Lucas's voice. "Keep it clean. I don't want any trouble when I take over the company." The ballroom exploded into horrified whispers. The elite guests Brittany had so desperately tried to impress now looked at her like she was a monster. Champagne glasses stopped halfway to their owner's lips. Marcus Sterling, a powerful investor sitting at the front table, stood up with a look of pure disgust. Lucas shrieked, his voice cracking with terror. "You can't do this. That's my inheritance. You're old. You don't have a right to destroy my future just because of a seat by a pathetic restroom." I looked at the son I had raised for 32 years. My smile was as cold as the surface of Lake Michigan in the dead of winter. I stepped closer and spoke directly into the still active microphone. Your future? Lucas, did you ever stop to wonder how a bride like Brittany managed to book this ballroom on a peak holiday? I paused for a beat, letting the truth sink into his paralyzed brain. You forgot one vital thing. The plaza is owned by a real estate group, and that group is a majority-owned subsidiary of Redford Holdings. In other words, you're throwing a wedding inside my pocket. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on the banquet manager trembling in the corner. And I have more bad news for you both. Since yesterday's transfer contract was a forgery, I canceled the payment for this $500,000 party 15 minutes ago. This party hasn't been paid for. Brittany dropped the scraps of paper from her hands. Lucas collapsed to his knees. The guests began to stand up and flee as if the ballroom were on fire. The sandcastle they had built with lies and their father's blood had completely crumbled at my feet. But this was only the beginning of the storm. I wasn't just taking back my money. I was going to take back everything they thought was theirs. I walked out of the ballroom at the plaza without looking back once. Behind me, the sound of crystal glasses shattering, Brittany's hysterical screams, and the stunned murmurs of New York's elite faded away. To my ears, that chaos was more soothing than any symphony. I stepped into the elevator, pulled out my phone, and began making a series of pre-scheduled calls to my wealth managers. Freeze all authorized user credit cards in the names of Lucas and Brittany. Do it now, I commanded. Strip Lucas of his status as a legal representative for every subsidiary under Redford Holdings. Revoke all access to the trust funds. I want them penniless before the sun comes up. I exited the hotel, but didn't head toward the luxury limos waiting out front. Instead, I walked 2 blocks to where my old Ford pickup was parked. I climbed into the cabin, and a familiar scent of old leather and engine oil wrapped around me, providing a sense of security that the glittering ballroom never could. In my rear-view mirror, I saw 2 police tow trucks heading toward the hotel entrance. They were there to repossess the Mercedes S-Class and the Porsche I had purchased in my name for them. Close behind was a property management team, on their way to seal the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, a place where I had prepaid the rent for a year, but the lease was now terminated due to a violation of the moral turpitude clause. I slowly started the engine. It roared to life with a rugged rumble. I turned on the Frank Sinatra music my wife used to love so much. In the quiet space of the truck cabin, the phone on the passenger seat began to vibrate incessantly. It was Lucas. I hit the speakerphone. His voice came through raspy and desperate, muffled by the sound of sirens and wind whistling through the phone. "Dad, what are you doing?" he shrieked, his voice breaking. "Security just kicked us out of the hotel. The police are padlocking the apartment. We're standing on the sidewalk with our suitcases. Brittany is losing her mind. She says if I don't fix this in an hour, she's filing for divorce immediately. She says she can't live in some cheap motel. Dad, please, save me one last time. I'm your only son." I looked out at the heavy Manhattan traffic, feeling my own coldness wrap around me like a solid shield. "Save you?" I repeated, my voice as flat as a frozen lake. "I am saving you, Lucas. For 32 years, I've harmed you by being the giant oak tree that blocked all the sun from reaching you. Now, I'm teaching you how to be a self-made man, just like you so proudly brag about on that stage tonight. Dad, you can't be this cruel." He sobbed. "Cruelty is letting your wife dip my thumb in red ink while you thought I was dying." I replied, "Tonight, enjoy the New York skyline. It's quite beautiful for those with no home to go to." I disconnected. My truck rolled forward, pulling away from the glitz of Midtown. In a single night, they had fallen from the heights of vanity into a bottomless pit of debt. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a used ATM. I was Thomas Redford, and I was finally starting to clear the wreckage of my life. 3 days after the chaos at the plaza, I sat quietly in my office on the top floor of the Redford Tower. In front of me, a MacBook Pro displayed live footage from security cameras. Brittany and Lucas were in the lobby, arguing frantically with the security team. There were no extravagant wedding gowns or sleek tuxedos left. They looked disheveled, pathetic, and panicked. When the office door finally swung open, Brittany lunged in first, shoving Lucas aside like a broken toy. She fell to her knees beside my desk. The same hands that had dipped my thumb in red ink were now clawing at the fabric of my vest. She began to whimper, her tone shifting into a fake, flirtatious pout. "Tom, please listen to me," she pleaded. "Lucas lied to me. He's the one who forced me to do those things. He's just a coward with no real talent. You are the real man who built this empire from the ground up. I can take care of you, Tom. I'll do anything you want. Just please don't take back my Chanel bags or my jewelry. Let me keep a little bit of my dignity, and I'll be yours." Lucas stood frozen at the door, his face flushed deep red with humiliation. He stared at the woman for whom he had sacrificed his own father, watching her deny his very existence just to cling to his father's checkbook. I looked at them both and felt a profound sense of emptiness. I had failed as a father. I hadn't taught my son how to distinguish between solid gold and gold-plated trash. Lucas finally found his voice, though it was cracked and broken. "Brittany, we just took our vows. I gave up everything for you." "Shut up, Lucas," she shrieked back at him. "You have nothing without your father's money. You are absolute zero." I slowly twirled my Mont Blanc pen between my fingers, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Are you finished? Brittany, you're right about one thing. Lucas has indeed failed. But you're dead wrong if you think I'm going to support a parasite like you." I didn't waste another second looking at her face, which was now contorted in shock. I pressed the intercom for security. "I have 2 uninvited guests here. Escort them out. And remember, from this day forward, no one carrying the name Redford is allowed into this building without my personal authorization." As security dragged a screaming Brittany and a staggering Lucas out of the room, I watched my son's back. He looked like a hollow shell of a man. That was the moment he realized the price of betrayal wasn't just money. It was a total collapse of his human dignity. Early the next morning, while a thick fog still draped the steel towers of downtown, I drove Lucas to a construction site in rural Massachusetts. This was the very place where, 40 years ago, I poured my first batches of concrete with my own sweat and blood. The roar of excavators, the pungent scent of damp earth, and the rhythmic clanging of hammers created a raw symphony of labor, the kind of sound my son had always despised. I pulled the old Ford truck to a stop, stepped out, and stood silently amidst the jagged red earth. I leaned down, scooped up a handful of dirt and gravel, and squeezed it tight in my palm. The rough sand bit into my skin before slowly trickling through my fingers. I looked at those grains of dust and thought to myself, even the grandest empires begin in the mud, and if they lose their respect for it, they can return to dust just as quickly. I opened the truck door and tossed a pair of beat-up work boots and a heavy iron shovel at Lucas's feet. He looked at those mud-caked boots as if they were disease. "Your choice is simple, Lucas," I said, my voice calm but as cold as a court sentence. "The files regarding your forgery and the embezzlement you committed with Brittany are already sitting on the police chief's desk. The $500,000 debt from the wedding and the unauthorized expenses has been fully itemized. Now, you either sign this labor agreement to work off your debt here at minimum wage, or I let the law take its course. You'll have at least 10 years in prison to reflect on your high society status." Lucas stared at me, his eyes wide with shock and rage. He pointed at the workers covered in grime in the distance, his voice hissing with pure venom. "You're making me do this? You have tens of millions in the bank. You have a tower with your name on it, and you're forcing your only son to dig dirt like some lowlife peasant? You're a cruel monster, a twisted old man who just wants to see his own son humiliated. I'd rather go to jail. I'd rather rot in a cell than lower myself to this filthy blue-collar trash." I looked at him, feeling no anger, only a deep sense of pity. He called those workers lowlives, yet it was their hands that built the comfortable bed he'd slept in for 30 years. He despised the shovel, the very tool that fed him and given him the name Redford. "Lowlife." I smiled bitterly. "The people you look down on know the actual value of a dollar. They know that when they lay a brick, they are building a future. You, on the other hand, only know how to destroy one with polished lies. You choose prison because you're still dreaming that you'll be served like a gentleman behind bars." I slowly pulled out my phone and hit a speed dial number. Mark, have the police units move in. Lucas turned pale. He looked toward the site entrance, where a squad car with its lights flashing was slowly approaching. His final shred of arrogance began to crack against the cold reality of the situation. He looked at the shovel, then back at the police car. Beads of sweat rolled down his forehead, mixing with the construction dust that was already beginning to cling to his soft skin. "Dad, you're not joking, are you?" he stammered. "I never joke about the rules of labor, Lucas," I replied, looking directly at the citizen watch on my wrist. "So brace yourself, son. The police will be here in exactly 10 minutes. You have exactly 10 minutes to decide if you want to be a man who knows how to hold a shovel or a criminal with a serial number in a penitentiary." I turned my back and walked toward the foreman's shack, leaving him standing alone at the crossroads of truth and illusion. This was the final lesson I could teach him before letting go forever. 1 year has passed. I am sitting on the porch of a cabin in rural Vermont, where the frantic noise of New York City is nothing more than a fading memory. Before me, the valley stretches out under the glow of an autumn sunset. There are no more financial reports, no more betrayals, just me and an absolute beautiful silence. This morning, I received a letter from Lucas from the penitentiary. He didn't ask for money this time. Instead, he wrote about his hands, how they are now calloused from learning to repair tractors. He told me that for the first time in his life, he understands the quiet pride of tightening a bolt with his own strength. Lucas still has a long road ahead to pay for his legal mistakes, but at least he has finally begun to learn how to stand on his own 2 feet. And Brittany? She has vanished completely from high society. There are no more glittering photos on Instagram. She's currently working 12 hours a day at a small diner in a remote town just to chip away at her debts. Greed took her to the heights of illusion, and that same greed pushed her back into the harsh reality of a life where you have to earn your keep. I take a sip of hot tea. A few months ago, I transferred the bulk of my estate, approximately $40 million, into a scholarship fund named after my late wife. The Mary Redford Fund now provides tuition for underprivileged youth attending trade schools for mechanics. I wanted the money from my sweat to be a foundation for those who respect the value of hard work, rather than a fuel for laziness. I looked down at my hands. The scars and the calluses are still there. They are the witnesses to a life lived honestly. I've realized a bitter truth. Money cannot buy a family, but it is a powerful tool for delivering justice. I am no longer angry with Lucas, and I hold no malice toward Brittany. Hatred is a burden far too heavy to carry, and I have chosen to set it down. Dignity isn't about which table you sit at during a party. It's about whether you can look yourself in the mirror every morning and hold your head high. I have fulfilled my duty as a father, not by giving my son money, but by teaching him about consequences. To the fathers listening, do not let blind love cloud your eyes to greed. Our dignity is our most precious asset, and it must never be up for auction, not even to our own flesh and blood. To the children, the callous hands of your parents are the very platform for your wings. Never pluck the feathers from the ones who taught you how to fly, because when the storm comes, they are the only ones who will shield you with their very lives. The sun has set. I stand up, walk inside, and close the door. The story of the $5 million check is over. A new, peaceful life is waiting for me. The story ends here, but the reflections it leaves behind will surely linger in our hearts. What do you think about the father's actions? Was his punishment too cruel, or was it a just lesson that those who betray their parents had to receive? Please share your thoughts and perspectives in the comments below. I truly value and read every single one of your responses.